Hey everyone, my name is Elio. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Scalestack, and welcome to the Revenue Engine Master podcast. Today I have welcome here Chris DeNoia, and we met at a dinner a couple of weeks ago, and it was great, and we shared a lot of like Italian jokes and stories. And so I'm very thrilled to have you today. Your career is super interesting to me. You have a lot of experience in sales, in startups, in product management and operations. And actually, you started from product management and operations in a lot of different industries, including healthcare and financial services, and then SaaS. And so I found like your story very compelling, and also because you've seen like everything from scratch, building revenues from zero, and then helping scaling companies to 100 million ARR or plus in many different roles as a P&L owner, as a sales leader, CRO, maybe consultant advisor. I know that you're doing like some fractional CRO roles now. And you are an advisor to many companies. And so I thought that it was a very interesting story. Plus you teach also, which I always found interesting. It's on my to-do list or bucket list. I think you teach at Berkeley also and other colleges. And so the wealth of expertise and experience in revenue growth and team leadership was very compelling. And so I think this is perfect for diving into what makes a strong revenue engine, which is like the topic of our podcast. So welcome, Chris. Maybe you want to get started, if I missed anything on this intro or anything that you want to highlight for the people listening.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Really excited to dive into some topics. And I would say that even in all the roles that I had, I am like an accidental sales expert now. And because I firmly believe that almost every role in an organization is a sales role. Now, as you know, being the founder of a company, the founder does all sales, whether it's externally bringing in the first customers or even selling the company, to investors. And product managers are also in sales as well, because owning a P&L, you are responsible for the sales. And my first sort of experience in sales as a product manager, back in my healthcare days, I worked at United Healthcare and I helped launch the health savings account. And realizing that we had 5 different go-to-market strategies at the same time launching a new product, which is you would never launch a company this way. Right. But we had enterprise accounts that we needed to service. We had mid-market that were direct sales. We had mid-market and SMBs that we needed to service that went through healthcare brokers. And we had sort of self-sign-up accounts, PLG almost at the time, although no one called it PLG back then. So we launched products and we had to go serve our existing markets in all of these different sales channels. Right. So from that perspective, almost everyone in an organization is responsible for sales. That's why I say I'm an accidental sales expert.
And thank you for that. And I find that the founder role as the key seller is so important because you find you have to explain your vision, and you have to explain the story and why you're doing this and why do you care all the time. Can you maybe highlight, across all of the different experiences, what do you think are the 2-3 top experiences that really have shaped your approach to revenue and sales leadership? Because I find, I have my own experiences here, and last week I posted about the origin story of Scalestack, and it was fun for me to go back and think why am I doing this? And there are really specific reasons that have shaped the idea of what I'm doing now. And so I'm curious about your key experiences that have shaped your approach to revenue and sales leadership.
Yeah, sure. So it's a great question, and there's a couple of different ones that I kind of lean on from my experience. The first one is actually still back when I was a product manager. They created a new group for me called New Product Development. which is code for sales. They didn't
Yeah.
tell me that when I did that. And it was basically the instruction was go to our existing accounts and try and find a problem that we can solve. And if you sell it, we will build it. So I learned how to sell on a whiteboard, pre-product, pre-anything, which was going and finding out what our customers' problems were. Right. This is what we now know as customer discovery from the Steve Blank and the lean startup. But back then, that did not exist, and I was an entrepreneur before that word even existed. But it was a sales role. It was not a quota carrying, but we had to sell something that way. So my first experience in sales was really, you need to solve a real problem. Nobody cares about your technology or your solution. They care about the problem that it solves for them. And if you could do that, then they're going to be interested. So that was sort of like my first experience, and you have to solve a real problem. The second one was about empathy, and we talked about this a little. Is that this is one of the things I learned when I first started becoming a manager and consulting with some companies, is that if you don't love your customer, you are going to have a hard time selling to them. And that because you need to love your customer, you need to have empathy for them and their problem and their plight in order to sort of go that extra mile to solve that problem for them. This was really highlighted. One of the companies I was consulting with, I saw that there was a real almost disdain for their customers when they started. When they didn't close a sale, they're like, those customers are idiots. They don't understand. They don't know their own business. And all that. It was really negative. And I just kind of throw up the timeout signal. I said, hey, if you don't change your attitude, this company's not going to be successful. They're smart. They're independent businesses. They know what they need to do better than we do. We need to have more empathy for them. And once we sort of turned that corner and started having empathy for them, the results started really rolling in. So that was so those two were I'll stop at two because those were the two really big aha moments. There's
And there
clearly
is so much to unpack here. So I want to go a little bit point by point. The first one is we are here to solve problems. And I love that. And that's how I think. I think that when you talk to customers, the goal and the way how we're going to make money is if we solve problems for them and their use cases. There is another side of this argument that is not different, but it's a different perspective, which is, all right, but if you build for that, then you're going to have either a service business, so that you're basically customizing too much, or a product that is all over the place. And I have this debate internally with my co-founder who leads product all the time.
Yeah.
And so what is your perspective on that? Because yes, we want to follow the customers and we want to solve their problems, but also we want, and assuming that we want to build a product and not like a service business, how do you solve for that and within that sort of different range of perspectives?
Yeah, and I think that I think the answer is you can do both. You have to listen, but you don't have to follow everything they say. So a lot of times, when a customer tells you what they want, that's not really what they want. And this is where the product manager and real in-depth conversation happens. Like the famous quote here is, if Henry Ford said, if I asked somebody what they want, they'd have a faster horse, right? But that's not what they want. That's the solution they have in mind. If you focus on the problem, what's the problem with the current horse? They smell, you have to feed them, you get wet in the rain, and all of these other things, right? They get scared when they hear a gunshot or something else. So you look at the problem that you're trying to solve and solve them. And the technology example here is the iPhone and Steve Jobs and stuff. If you asked a customer, they would want a replaceable battery. Right. And the focus there from a product perspective is a replaceable battery is the least important thing of a phone. Right. There's so many more important things that you want and need to work really well before you replace that battery. And I think the same thing goes with software, right? Because You've mentioned being a service business. Well, that's what SaaS is, right? It's software as a service. You don't have to build every feature to solve every problem, but you want to build the software to solve the majority of the problems that customers have. And at a certain scale, you can make your product customizable so they can customize their solution, so to speak.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that like the examples that you made, like Ford or like Steve Jobs, are like examples where like there was a very solid perspective and also the ability to say no. I remember like 15, 20 years ago when like the no, maybe 15 years ago when like the iPhone started to like reach critical mass, and Steve Jobs was still answering emails. And like I remember that there was a problem with the antenna around the phone, and he answered customer service email saying, "Just don't hold the phone that way." That was his answer to the guy complaining about that. So you do have to say no to customers sometimes, but also like you have to solve for like the deep core like problems that make their life much better if you do.
Right. And this is the discipline of being a product manager, I also think translates into the discipline of sales, which is a good product manager does not have to design for every solution. They prioritize. Right? A good salesperson does not show every feature, does not go through every in-depth thing that the solution can do. They focus on what are the top two or three problems the customer needs to solve, and they show how the solution solves those problems.
Yeah.
That's how we teach people how to demo as well. We see like the biggest problem with most demos is people trying to show every feature, all the functionality. As we like to say, they show up and throw up their entire solution. Right? And how many times have you sat through a demo and someone's like, "Oh, let me show you how you log in with your password." You're like, "Okay, I assume that it has password security. Don't show me that. Here's my problem. Go right to the thing that I want to solve."
Yeah, yeah. And I think people love to see demos, but like also people have like a short attention span, and so you need to be quick. You need to be like showing only the highlights of that. Totally agree on that. So prioritization basically in both like the product development and the priorities that the product has, and also in the way salespeople present the product to customers.
Yeah.
Love that. The other thing that you said, and you mentioned this in my prep, and I really like fell in love with that, is that like in order to sell, you need to love your customers. And I think intuitively many people would agree with that. For some others, maybe is like surprising to hear that. Maybe if you can elaborate on that, and particularly on what exactly it means and how do you hire for that? Because like it seems that we make choices about the industry. I mean, you focusing on healthcare or financial services, like sort of by happenstance. Those are like I happen to be here, but maybe in reality it's not. And so, how do you hire for that?
Yeah. So let's break it down in the first couple of parts, right? The first one is, why do you have to love your customer, right? Well, one of them is practical, is that in recurring revenue and subscription, right, this is a long-term relationship. You are going to be with them for years. And benchmark and some of the others, especially on the enterprise and mid-market, sometimes the payback period after you acquire a customer is 2 to 5 years. For a lot of companies, I think that's coming down now with more discipline. People are getting away from the scale at all costs, but the payback periods are still really high. So if a customer churns before that, it's kind of a disaster in terms of the metrics and the finances of the company, right? So as part of that, I said you need to love your customer because you need to listen to them and listen to their problems and make sure you are solving the right thing. And if you have disdain or even any bit of sarcasm or anything like that towards your customers, or animosity, lack of respect, even on a lesser scale, that's going to come out. That's going to come out because when it gets down to the final stages of a sales cycle, and someone is considering which alternative, right? They're going to look at your solution. What is your unique value proposition? How do you differ from How do you differ from your competitors? But at the most part, this is where the sales team is so important. At the end of the day, people make emotional decisions, and when they're making larger ticket, decisions that are harder to
Purchasing.
reverse, they're going to choose the people they want to be partnered with, right? When solutions are generally equal or slightly the same price, they're going to say, who do I want to meet with on a quarterly basis or a monthly basis and do my renewal with, right? That's who they're partnering with. And if you're not empathetic to them and you don't want them to succeed, they will see right through that.
Love it. And so, how do you hire for this?
Uh,
Particularly like sales reps roles.
yeah, there's a couple of different techniques that I like to do. One of them is I like to hire from my customers. So sometimes if you are hiring from certain, if you have a vertical solution, right, hiring from that vertical usually works out well because you can teach a lot of people sales skills, right? It's harder to teach empathy, but you can teach empathy. So if you were in a sales stack, hiring from salespeople, salespeople who are selling to salespeople, it's the easiest thing to do, right? Because they know their customers, they care about their customers, right? That's why, as a sales trainer, sometimes I would not be a successful sales trainer if I didn't care about salespeople, if I didn't care about their success. I would not be a good teacher like for the National Science Foundation if I didn't care about entrepreneurs, if I didn't empathize with their struggle to go from $0 to $1 in revenue and go through all of that. Right? And that comes out really clearly when you're working with them if you're just sort of like showing up and kind of going through some motions. Right? So loving your customers and searching for that in certain ways, hiring from your customers is one way to do it. And then the other way is sometimes you have to interview for this as well.
Yeah.
You have to ask them sort of like those empathetic questions. Just like you're doing. It's like you're like, what was the last time you had a problem with a customer and how'd you deal with it, right? Or what was the last time that you had to have a real difficult conversation with a customer? Um, Particularly difficult in startups when you don't have product market fit, and sometimes you sell something to a customer that's not a good fit, and then you have to fire a customer. That's the most painful thing in the world. That is the most
Firing
painful thing to
customers.
do. Oh,
Yes.
I still have scars from having to do that in certain.
Very hard.
Yeah,
Very hard. Because I mean like there is the revenue
yeah,
component that you want to keep, but then like, maybe they're taking you in a million different directions that you don't want. Yes. I've lived through
yeah. They're
that and
taking
it's
a
very
million,
painful.
or the company has pivoted into a different direction, and management has made a decision that they're no longer going to support and service that technology, and everything's just going to be deprecated.
Yeah.
And you have to go back and just say, "Hey, I'm sorry." You have to do like that. That's a painful conversation.
Yeah. Another thing that I personally do is also like, and I think we talked in the prep for this about curiosity. I think that it's not that you have to like love them, but like I think you have to have that amount of curiosity that like you care about them, that you want to solve their problems, that you're like are gonna ask a ton of questions to like understand what their problems are and what are their priorities and what they're looking to solve. And so that's something that it's interesting to hire for and also test during the interview, I think.
Yes, yeah. So you have to hire for curiosity in terms of that way, and you have to, and as a sales leader, you have to teach people sometimes how to be curious because they don't, because the customer also never tell you their problem right away. Right. And the techniques that we use sometimes, by the way, come straight from operations management. It's root cause analysis or 5 whys or whatever you want to talk about it. You need to dig into starting with, hey, what are you working on today? What are you trying to accomplish? And then dig in, usually through mirroring or what and how questions and kind of going through the process. You need to go down usually 5 levels to find the real problem that needs to be solved. They will
Yeah.
never tell you on the first answer. Never
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah, the Ford example that you brought up earlier, right? Like the horse. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting
yeah,
that you brought
yeah.
that up.
So,
Yeah.
and yeah, which is a great example of using, using past history to help. The curiosity of past history helps you uncover those, right? When was
Yeah.
the last time you took your horse out? Walk through that problem of what you had. So that is this works in sales and it works for entrepreneurs who are trying to do customer discovery.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to get good answers, quality answers, if they tell a story from a particular experience
Hmm.
because it's vivid rather than like an average. You know what I mean? Which is sort of like, hey, tell me what your sales cycle is like. And everyone's like, well, my average sales cycle is this. There's no such thing as average. No one is ever average. You either have sales that close way quicker or take twice as long, and what you want to do is figure out what are the unique issues with both of those interactions, right?
Yeah.
When you're working with the sales team, because the average usually doesn't exist.
And also in general, I mean, like, yeah, this is a great point. I don't want to diverge too much, but like, I spent a few years at Amazon, and when you do interviews at Amazon, you're never satisfied with a generic statement. You want to go like and dive deep into like, okay, tell me a specific example of what you did in that situation, and what were like the things that you did and what results they brought. So not like the generic, like the average and like the system, but like the
Yeah,
specifics of what happened.
exactly. And when you're doing interviews, in the interview process, it's called a behavioral interview question. Like, tell me a time when you achieved something. And those answers are usually kind of canned BS uh, type of answers. But if you can get them to a very, if you can lead them to a behavioral question without them knowing you're leading them to a behavioral question, right? Then you're going to get a better answer, right?
Yeah.
How we ask questions is very important.
Very good. All right, let's. This is all super interesting,
Yeah.
and like we touch on some operational things. At Scalestack, we are big, obviously, on leveraging technology for more productivity, efficiency, and automating like as much as possible. We also start from a perspective that in many ways technology has failed us over the last like 15, 20 years in go to market. And
Yes.
so I'm curious about your perspective on this. And so like your level of happiness with the current technology, or like, what systems you think you need that exist today and that can help run sales or revenues more smoothly, and what are the gaps instead that exist?
Yeah. So, one of the things at Winning by Design, we used to say that if you make a bad process more efficient, you're just going to make a really a worse process or have a worse outcome, right? And it's the same thing. Is that if you have the biggest risk, especially if you're doing an outbound sales motion. Like if you have SDRs doing an outbound sales motion and they're not being responsive, or they're not being, they're not handling the objections, or they're spamming, the risk is if you make that process really efficient, they will burn through and destroy a territory really, really quick, right? So you have to be very careful not to make an efficient process out of something that is already harming your company, right? So there are certain things that work really well with efficiency, right? Which is research, data, and preparation, right? That kind of stuff. So, so some of the things that Scalestack does, which is, hey, if your CRM isn't updated and you need to find, the contacts or the URL or some research or stuff like that, any stuff that's not going to hurt the customer or hurt your motion, right? That's a great stuff to automate, right? But if the sales stack that's like, we're going to automate all your customer calls so we can call 200 customers at once and we'll hang up on the 199 when the one answers, right? If you start hanging up on 10 customers every 30
Yeah.
seconds, right, that's not going to be a good experience for them,
Yeah.
because they're less likely to pick up any phone or anything outside. So I think we have to be really careful about about the negative impact or what we like to call second order consequences of things that are customer facing. So I really
And
like technology and improvements on internal stuff. And some other internal tracking and stuff and technology for that, that's really good. Automating or tracking outbound sequences, great stuff. Automating how visibility that we have into the contracting process, great stuff. But some of the other stuff is automation just for automation, and it's automating a process that A should not be done, or B is already poor, so we're making more efficient a bad process, and it's a downward spiral.
yeah, I love everything that you've said there, and I think that I mean, with any new technology, there's been a rush to like, oh, let's use AI to automate everything, and rush to do like this AI SDR, for instance. And I think that, like removing the human component out of that is very dangerous, and because it removes like the prioritization that a human can put in there. Like for me, all of the systems need to help the salespeople like prioritize. Okay, I have my patch in my territory. This is my account list. What are the top accounts that I need to focus today and tomorrow and this week and this month? And so that like it's not about like let's basically spread the message all across and see what sticks, but it's like how do I can achieve like the thoughtfulness of being prioritizing the right things at the right time. And we are strong believers in this.
Yeah.
But I think that like AI, like there's been a push at the beginning to say, let's automate everything. But I don't think it's how it should be thought about.
Yeah, look, there are some really good solutions that AI is doing, but it's not perfect yet. So it needs some guardrails. Like we've seen, even in America, like we've seen some of the legal cases that AI hallucinates some legal verdicts and stuff like that. And look, I've
It
used
didn't show
AI
up to a court date, I think. One
to a
of the
court date.
ladies.
Like I've used AI. Like I'm having a sports conversation with some friends, right? And some of the things that AI is really good at is giving you a lot of data quickly. Right? I'll give you dumb examples. Like we were like, well, give me a list of the 30 defensive tackles or linemen drafted in the last 5 years in the first round, kind of because the NFL draft's coming up, and it kind of gives you this list, and it looks really impressive, and it takes 30 seconds. But we're sports fans. We're like, wait a minute. What about this person? They were drafted in the first round, and AI is like, oh yeah, sorry, forgot that one. So it's not perfect yet,
No.
and you have to be careful about the data that you get back that you're going to go and do it. And here's the example that I use even as a consultant. Right, AI is really good at producing some assets that consultants used to do. Right. So if you upload your current sales playbooks, your current marketing material, your current whatever into an AI and ask it to generate a sales playbook for you, you will get a sales playbook in 30 seconds and it will be decent. It'll be decent. It'll be like a B. Right. But you don't hire people for B work. Right. So you need somebody to take that B work and bring it up to an AA plus work, or at least test it and run it through an iteration process. Now, internally, sometimes your VP sales or your line managers can do that because a lot of the legwork was done for them, so they have some capacity to do that. But you need to be careful not to just take the download from AI and just say, okay, now we have a finished product. Let me give it to my sales team and let them run with it. That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's why also our perspective is that you cannot do everything well and, all the time. And so our idea is to use AI almost as like we are training these models and some agents to become really good in the specific use case that we're working on, which is not every use case for like every industry or every type of customer, or like, for sales, finance, and HR. It's like go to market. Let's train these agents to become really good at this.
Yeah, and this is why I think that this is the thing that agents are going to do really well, that I'm not sure a lot of people have really focused on much, is that like the use case is a product term, right? And each use case is usually solving a particular problem or a particular challenge that someone needs to do. So this is what I like about AI agents, because they could be hyper focused on a specific problem that people are trying to solve. And that's really important. And that's the focus that we're talking about, is eliminate all the other stuff,
Yes.
that all the other features and stuff like that, is that this AI agent's going to solve one problem, whether it's data aggregation or some research or some other things, and stuff like that. And that's the problem it's going to solve. So we can have 80 agents doing different things. Those are like 80 different features, and you may just prioritize which agents you really need to solve the problem that you have.
100%. This is exactly how we are Scalestack are thinking about this, and we are excited about the results, because the more you train them, the more like you let them become really good at that, like better outcomes for
Yeah.
customers, for the product.
And here's the part where the sales team is critically important as the part of the feedback loop to product management and stuff like that. Because when you talk about your customers and what problems that they're trying to solve, right, the best sales team take the features or problems that customers are trying to solve that we don't solve for yet, and feed that back into the product team as potential features. And a good product team will stack up all of those problems slash use cases, and when it hits a critical mass like that of a number of customers, then they build it and put it into the roadmap, right? And with the aggregate of this, what becomes important, this is where we're going to link it back to empathy, right? Is that the more the sales team can empathize with their customer, find out what the problem is, the better the feedback for the use case in the next AI is going to be. Right?
I love it.
Yeah, it all starts with the problem and diagnosing the problem. And this is why we like to use my healthcare background as well. We talked about it, is that the phrase I love to use for salespeople and entrepreneurs and people launching new products is prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. Right? You showed up to your doctor and they said, take these 3 pills without talking to you, you'd sue them for malpractice. You're like, dude, you don't even know what's wrong with me yet.
I love
And
it.
yeah,
Prescription without the assessing of the problem is always malpractice.
is malpractice, right? And so this is what salespeople do if they try and sell a product or a solution before understanding the problem that the customer's trying to solve. They're gonna lose.
Yeah.
They're gonna lose because they're gonna focus on the wrong features or the wrong thing, and no one's gonna see value in it.
Yeah, or maybe because they are impatient and don't spend the time and don't ask the questions, that they're not curious, so they just want to get out of the next thing, and it doesn't work
Yeah.
that way.
Well, look, and this is where, and that's where stages, sometimes sales process creates bad behavior, because a sales rep will think, if I get to demo, oh, I'm on stage 3 already, right? I could bypass discovery and qualification and discovery and get right to demo. My customer's in stage 3 with a higher probability of closing, right?
Yeah.
That's where process and data and conversion rates are garbage, right? Because they're getting to a stage artificially rather than going through stage gates that they need to pass through, right? Which is why a good sales process will have entry gates and exit gates at each stage, right? And an entry gate is something that the customer has to do
Yeah.
rather than just information that the sales rep gets.
Awesome. Let's switch gears a little bit, and like we're talking about like the CRO role. I mean, you are now like helping a couple of companies in that sort of like fractional role. It's a relatively new role, the CRO, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are still, I see lots of different interpretations of what the role should be. For instance, the big debate around like, should it be like, all revenues, meaning like sales and marketing, or just sales? and like people are very passionate about this. And so what's your interpretation of the role and what it should and should not be?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, I think a chief revenue officer is responsible. Any revenue that comes in needs to flow through the chief revenue officer. If revenue comes in through the organization does not ultimately flow through the chief revenue officer, then they're not a chief revenue officer, right? So they're a mostly revenue officer, so to speak, or the 80/20 rule, like they're a Pareto, revenue officer, right? Which means in subscription models that customer success ultimately needs to report up through the chief revenue officer. If you're a CRO who's not responsible for renewals or upselling or cross-selling, you're not really doing a chief revenue officer. It's a title inflation, so to speak. That and I think the reason why the role is so important is this shift 20, 25 years ago from one-time large licensing fees to subscription models sort of mandated that. Because at a certain size, usually around 50 million in ARR, right, the majority of the revenue is coming from renewals.
Yeah.
Right. You can have a big sales team, and teams will go from 2.5 to 5, right? When you go from 5 to 10 million in revenue, right, that's usually half is renewal, half is new business. Then you go from 10 to 25. Well, now 15 is new ARR, and maybe a little more. You count for a little churn, and 10 is subscription. You go from 25 to 50 plus. It's 25. Yeah. But once you start getting 50, you start growing slower than your renewals.
Yeah.
So the majority of the revenue is coming from existing customers, upsell, cross-sell.
What about, I absolutely agree. What about marketing? Should, in those orgs where there is a CRO, should marketing report to the CRO?
So that's a great question, and I think it depends on. I don't have as much of a universal answer for that. I think it depends on the product and the industry. In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. And I would say, by the way, this is another one: is that if you have a chief marketing officer, right, the chief marketing officer at a consumer-led company does not report to the CRO, so to speak. They're responsible for leads. If the marketing function needs to report to the CRO, then it's a VP of marketing type of role, so to speak. Right? That's usually more on pure enterprise plays where when you're focusing on the Fortune 100 and a lot of your marketing budget is based on events and one-on-one and getting a lot of C-level people into one organization, then typically they need to report into the CRO because I believe that it's more of an account-based marketing and it needs to sort of feed in there. You can't have that marketing person off doing their own thing, in a large account-based model. So
yeah, love that. Yes, and I think that's how the best organizations that we work with operate with those type of structures, like CROs that also owns the revenues from renewal and the CMO reporting to them if everything is sales driven. If not, like the CMO reports like elsewhere to the CEO typically.
Right. Yeah.
As a CRO, in one of your in your career in general, what would be a win that you would be particularly proud of, like in a specific company or like in a specific situation, something that sticks out as oh, I'm very proud I did that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of stories that I like to tell, and I usually don't name companies, but I'll tell you, one of the deals that I'm most proud of is I was working with a company, and we were kind of getting into our first enterprise deal, and it was a big deal for the company, Series A level company, and it was a big deal, and I was negotiating with the chief financial officer, and we negotiated a good deal. And the CEO and the chairman of their board thought it was too expensive. And over a weekend, the chairman of their board called me to try and negotiate and get a better deal. And I made it a point of not budging on the negotiation. And this was a valuable lesson because it turned out to pay much more dividends. The CFO was our champion, and I knew if I gave an inch, even to the chairman, that I was throwing the CFO under the bus. So I made a point of during my conversation with the chairman saying, "Look, I can't budge on this anymore. Your CFO did such a good job. I've got no more juice to squeeze out of this. I would love to give you a discount on that. I would love to do that. I just can't do that." Right? He negotiated. He hit me hard, and this is a big deal for us, and we want it. And he knew it, so he kind of, raked me over the coals on that, right? And we got the deal. And the CFO called me up afterwards. He's like, "Hey, thanks, man. I got a really big compliment from the chairman after his conversation with you." Nice. And because he was my champion, he wanted us to win this deal, and I knew I couldn't throw him under the bus. And years later, he was at a different company, and I did a different deal with him that took about this much time, right? Nice. Because he knew that I was going to deliver on what I said, and that was more of I was just really happy because there was a lot of pressure, right, and a lot of risk for us to lose this deal when the chairman calls you over a weekend.
How big was the customer company?
Oh, they were a multi-billion-dollar company.
Oh, so large.
They were a multi-billion-dollar company, and this was a low seven-figure deal. So it didn't match what was going on, right? I was very shocked, and so there's something about this deal that I knew was a little off, but it was vital to them. But I knew the chief financial officer wanted us to win that. And that's the key of being. We talked about this a little at dinner. That's the key to cultivating a champion. And I think what most sales reps get wrong is assuming they have a champion without knowing they have a champion. Right? So there's a real, there is a signal or some skills in developing a champion rather than just, somebody following Medic or MedPick and saying, "Oh, I've got my champion identified. It's this person." Yeah. Right. So that's one of my favorite deals.
Yeah, I love this story, and it's a story about deals. So that it's interesting about I would say I would also mention some of those deals as my biggest wins. Going back to the champion, which I think is super interesting, is my single way of assessing if I really have a champion is if during the deal I have their cell phone number and I can text them anytime and they answer quickly and they give me insights, and it's on text, it's not on email, it's not any even a phone call, it's on text, quick back and forth to reassess. That's a champion to me.
Yeah, and I would say for me, you have to have their cell phone. If you don't have their cell phone number, they're definitely not a champion, right? But it's personal contact plus inside information.
Of course.
Plus inside information. If they are not also a deal coach, if they're not telling you who the key decision makers are, what you need to do to help influence them, and who the other competitors are in the deal, and who is the competitor's champion. If you're not getting that kind of information, then you don't have a true champion.
100%.
They have to want you to win the deal, and then you have to deliver for them.
Very good. And instead, what is during the prep we talked about lots of different things. One of them was a passion about solving problems. We talked about solving problems for customers, but now in your fractional CRO roles, I'm sure that you solve a lot of problems for meaningful companies. And maybe if you can flag one sales or revenue or company problem that you have helped solve over the past year or two that you're particularly proud of.
So in the last couple of years, I've been working a lot with startups that are trying to get into the U.S. market.
Okay.
which has been really exciting. Like they have, you know, and so and I've seen this problem happening over and over. Is uh, and part of it's a vocabulary challenge. Is that there's some people who think go to market is just the first million to 5 million in revenue,
Mm.
so to speak. And the way, this is one of the things, the way we approach go to market at Winning by Design was go to market was an alignment of your customer segment, your ACV, your marketing, your sales, and your customer success or how you service that customer, right?
Hmm.
So you could have a like a PLG go to market strategy, an SMB go to market strategy, a mid market go to market strategy, an enterprise go to market strategy. And the mistake a lot of people make is thinking that, like if you're in the SMB, you just start selling into the enterprise, right?
Mm.
Like, oh, I'm just going to start selling into the enterprise, right? The enterprise solution is a different solution than an SMB solution, right? It usually requires more security. It usually requires more reporting. It usually requires more leveling, and a number of other things. And if they're going to pay more, they want more support. They're not going to
Yeah.
pay a lot of money for a SaaS solution and then go onto a chatbot to solve a problem. they
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
a phone call associated with it. So I think lately that's been more of my focus is helping teams, startups determine what their go to market is. As well as other larger teams figure out how are they going to go up market into a sort of enterprise solution, right? You're not going to do a lot of Instagram ads yeah, to get somebody. Like sometimes you go up market, you have to go to an event. You have to sponsor a booth. You have to, sit down with people and do that. That's not the only way to get it done, but it's aligning. The term that everyone likes to throw around now is helping buyers buy, right? So part of being empathetic is understanding how do your buyers buy and where do they buy,
Yeah.
and the head of an enterprise account does not buy the same way the head of an SMB, who is
Yeah.
usually the office manager or the owner buys, right? So you need a different marketing strategy, you need a different sales strategy, and you need a different customer success strategy to do that. So in that case, aligning the go-to-market with your customer profile and your ACV, because it needs to make financial sense, is one of the biggest conversions that's happening right now. And I think
Beautiful.
that's being
This is
exasperated by AI because, as you've seen, AI has started to really squeeze, uh, you know, subscription pricing. Subscription pricing. I had one friend whose solution sold into X or Twitter, right?
Mhm,
Right,
mhm.
and then and this is not an Elon Musk story as much as
Okay. I thought that
it,
that was
it,
that was
it's not an
related.
Elon Musk story as much as an account story, but because everybody knows the story, right? That when you sell a SaaS solution on a per seat licensing fee, right, and 80% of the customer gets fired, right? Well, there's 80% of your revenue, and then they
Yeah.
renegotiate the per seat number down 60%. You saw a seven-figure account go from seven figures to $50,000 in 1 year like that.
Yeah.
Uh, and you start to see that, with the last downturn and what's happening now. Some SaaS companies are going through another round of layoffs. Is not only is the and this focus on renewal and churn, is that you see not only the number of seats be reduced through turnover at your customer, but also they start to become more judicious about who gets licenses. So everybody may not need a license to the CRM when you can send out a report to them and do that, right?
Yeah.
And this is what AI agents are also going to help do as well. Is that it's cheaper to have a SaaS solution that uses agents to get the information that other people in the organization need than to give them licenses to the
All of them
software
are
and the
licensed. Yeah.
database and do that.
Yeah.
So
Awesome
all of
stuff.
that starts to, all of this is happening at the same time, which is why there's chaos in the industry right now
100%.
in terms of hiring, marketing, pricing, and everything. So it's a very exciting time to be in SaaS solutions.
100%. Chris, this was great. Maybe one last question. How do you feed your own curiosity, like outside of work? Like, do you, I know that you like to travel. You told me a couple of like great Italian stories. What about like books? What is that like feeds your curiosity the most?
I'm an avid reader. I
Okay.
read I read a lot. I read a lot, and one of the things like, and people ask me about sales books. I'm like, read them all. Like eventually your sales team, like I would have book clubs with sales, because you can get something from all of them, right?
Yeah.
It's you wouldn't be in any other industry without studying that industry so much. So I read a lot. I've read most of the sales books that are out there, right? If a sales book comes out, I'm probably going to read it. Like Matt Dixon's The Jolt Effect that came out, I guess, 2 years ago now. That was a big one that people like to focus on, particularly because I'm a big believer in mutual action plans, as we discussed, and
Yeah.
that was a big thing in The Jolt Effect. I like going back to the old ones. I really like the old Zig Ziglar, How to Close the Deals, right? And some of those are great. The in the SMB, I don't think anything works better, or my experience has been the alternative of choice close is the best closing technique out there, right? Which is, do you want to pay, do you want to do a monthly, or do you want to do an annual subscription with a discount? You give them choice A and B, and saying no, choice C is not even on the table, helps close more deals than everything else. But I did pull out, because I'm reading this again.
Okay.
One of my favorites. I
Oh,
gotta turn off my blur. Clear Thinking by Shane
oh, now I can
Parrish.
see. Yes, yes.
Yeah, Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish on decision making, and so it's part of Farnham Street. He's published the Mental Model series, which I think was a fantastic series. I believe that that's required reading for any CEO or product manager. Uh, and what I've been gravitating towards lately is now thinking more about decision making and decision making processes. And this is part of empathy, which is understanding how your customers make decisions, or the different ways they make decisions will help you serve them better. And especially in this fast paced moving decisions, what I'm focused more on now, even for myself, my own improvement, is how do I make decisions faster? How do I get quicker at making decisions? And as consultants, sometimes we're like, "Oh, that's an interesting question. Let me ponder that for a moment." And now he's like, "Okay, you don't have time to ponder this so much. Consume the data, think about it,
Yeah.
determine how risky the decision is, and if it's a reversible decision, don't spend much time at it at all. Go for it. If it's an irreversible decision, then you need to figure out how much data you need to
The
acquire."
two-way door versus one-way door at that
Yeah,
point.
two-way
Yes.
doors versus one-way doors, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Jeff Bezos talks about it,
Yes.
Amazon, and all that. So it's like that's where I'm moving past and it's congruent with where sales is going now. Again, the phrase I mentioned it earlier. The phrase that you hear a lot of people talk about now is helping buyers buy. Well, and it's alliterative, it's great, but the way I break that down is helping buyers buy is helping buyers make decisions. And if you, again, curiosity, root cause analysis is then you need to understand how they make decisions. And if you can understand how they make decisions, then you can help them make that decision because you're empathetic and you love them, and you want to influence them to make the right decision for them. Um, I
Very
think
good.
then from that point of view, I look at it from, like if we have a solution that we know we can help our customers, then we are failing if we don't help them buy it because they're losing out on the value that we bring. And that's where I
Love it.
take, that, like some people say you shouldn't take losing a deal personally. I take them very personally.
Me
you
too.
know
Me
yeah,
too.
I take it personally because it's one of those, like, I could have helped them. I could have done, they could have gained value. I would have gotten a
Yeah.
little about that value, but they would make out more than we do. And that's what, that's what SaaS solutions do. You deliver recurring value every single month or a year, whatever your billing cycle is. You get a little of that value, but you deliver way more than you get. No.
I love it, Chris. This was great. I feel that you should write a book. I mean, it feels that like, you are a professor, teacher, like, advisor, and you have a lot of thoughts. So maybe it's time to write a book.
Maybe it's time to think about it. Okay. And if I do that, I promise I will write it and I will not have AI write it for me.
All right, Chris, this was great. Thank you so much for being here with us. And grazie for like doing this for us.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Ciao. Bye.